Well, let's look at another movement that is affecting our American education system today. The effective schools movement was one of the major ones that came out of the 1990s, and also coming out of the same period was a move towards teaching to outcomes. And the orientation here was that if you aim at nothing, you sort of get nothing. So schools should start concentrating on what they aim at so that their teachers can teach that and so kids can work to reach those things that they said they should be able to know, be able to do, or believe in. Well, how would you define, just by the title and by looking at your schools today, what outcome based schooling is? What would you say? Well, the purpose of research, William Spady and others have said that OBE education, or outcomes based education, is simply an orientation that directs schools to define exactly what they want their kids to know and then to focus on those things by the scope and sequence of curriculum by the teaching staff on what skills and attitudes and knowledge they want their students to leave with. Now, those three areas, the skills are psychomotor, the attitudes are affective, and the knowledge is cognitive. So you looked at not only just what filling kids' heads with knowledge, the cognitive base, but also what skills they need to have and then what attitudes. And that sort of is a movement away from what we saw in the 50s, um, other than vocational training, uh, to all three areas to developing the whole child. Because William Spady said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So a lot of times schools would be excellent by the perception of the community or staff, but they actually hadn't defined exactly what their kids wanted to know, what they need to know, what they'd be able to do, and what they would believe. So let's look at the typical characteristics of an OBE school, and we'll see how these were embedded in the effective schools movement and are embedded in almost all the accreditation systems in our states that now use uh, an OBE system. First of all, looking at the whole list, you have a mission statement at the very top, which defines the school, then very specifically the indicators that would define that school to reach that mission statement were the exit outcomes. And then to reach those exit outcomes, you had a scope and sequence of curriculum from kindergarten to 12th grade to reach each of those exit outcomes. And then as they taught from kindergarten to 12th grade, there was always instructional variation. There was reteaching when kids didn't remaster or master the subject. And then you frequently tested, but they were all criteria-based reference testing based upon what the kid should be able to do by the third grade, fifth grade, and so forth. And then the kids didn't go on in an OBE school until they had mastered that outcome. Also indicative of the OBE school was effective schools correlates of positive school climate and a system of data collection. So they knew how kids were doing at very specific times in their career. So let's look at each of one of those in a lot more detail. First off, the mission statement is defined as a collective endorsed mission statement that reflects a staff's commitment to the school's primary purpose. It is something that's usually fought upon when you try to develop your mission statement. You fight over specific words, exactly what they mean, because this is going to set the tone for your school. But the focus should always be on achieving success for every kid, and it implements from its basic mission statement kind of the overall focus of the strategies that they're going to use to get kids to master those outcomes. And then it's going to focus on every kid's going to learn the intended curriculum through mastery learning. So, mission statement is usually hard to to write simply because there's so many varying opinions on what a school should be like and uh, what it should teach. So, the arguments usually involve five major questions that focus almost all of the issues that we face in American education today. First off, what should be taught? What should a school be responsible to teach when it comes to sex education, fun, and on health? What should it be taught in literature? What sort of books, novels, short stories should kids read? So should it be a European novel, or should there be a much more multicultural orientation? What should you teach in biology? That is, with Darwinism or creative intelligence. So we have a number of arguments over what should be taught. Um, and they've ranged ever since school started. And then second, how should it be taught? And a great variation in our schools today and its orientation on how, excuse me, it should be taught. Our big movement now is moving much more towards technology to online learning, especially in graduate schools and in colleges. But our arguments now revolve around how should kids learn and how should be taught. And then third, how should it be evaluated? Our norm reference test, our criteria reference test, our grade cards, grade values of A, B, C, good enough anymore. But how should kids be evaluated on what they learn, what they be able to do, and what they believe? And then fourth, who should be in charge of deciding? Should it be the Common Core curriculum in math and science, or a federal government, or should it be the different discipline areas with their own curriculum areas, or should it be the local board of education, or should it be groups of teachers writing the curriculum in each of the districts or county school systems, or should the school itself with its parents and teachers decide? But who should be charged of deciding? And then this seems like a strange question, but which children should be taught? And we see, and that's a whole other issue and can of worms that we'll talk about later in the class. But there seems to be a lot of disparity between and equity in geographical areas of which kids are getting stronger educations than others. So which kids should be taught is one of. Should charter schools be a central focus? Is it affecting the way public schools are financed? So these five questions, in essence, are usually being fought over in the mission statement. So, what do you believe is the primary aim of education? We're going to ask you to do a little 8 statement questionnaire, and you're going to be asked to rank order them from 1 being the highest to 8 being the lowest. And we'll see how your class does and what number 1 comes out to be and the like. But you're going to look at 8 statements. For example, do you believe one of the primary focuses of a school should be teaching behavior, that society is held together by right behavior, and so education should teach those people to be good, upright, and honest human beings? If you do, that might be number 1 for you. Or should it teach job skills? Is the statement, man is happiest when he knows that he has done a skillful job. So should people be taught things that help them to find an occupation and do their work better? Or third, is the primary aim of education to teach a knowledge base that's valued for its own sake, because in knowledge there is wisdom, and education should teach those things that have been true for all people for all times. And a lot of times this involves the general truths in life as found in the various religions? Or should it be family? Is the family the most important in the focus and aim of education? That education should teach one to be a more able and responsible family member. Or is citizenship in these times when we must all work together to build our country? Education must teach us first and foremost to be informed, to be reliable citizenship. So is citizenship a primary focus of education? It was in our early schools, and one of the reasons it was founded. Or is money and success? And now that all the talk is over, we must admit that it's natural for men and women to want a comfortable way of life and to share in the good things that they deserve. So education should primarily be planned to bring man money and happiness and success. So if that is a primary focus, uh, how would it rank? For example, why are you taking this course? It's probably not for the fact that Kent Runyan's teaching it, or that some of the others above, but you want to get a master's degree and learn some things that will make you more successful as a teacher. And then for seventh, history and culture. Our nation is, if it's to go ahead, our people must start by knowing and understanding their historical and cultural roots. Education thus should teach us to know about our past and what parts of it helped and what parts hindered us. So history and culture, it might be the primary focus. Or last, is it this, that freedom means choice, that man with no education may believe all or nothing that he hears or reads, but education should provide him with the confidence, creativity, communication skills to make intelligent choices in all areas of his life. So we're going to ask you to rank order those, and we'll compare those and see what your class comes up with as 1 through 8. Well, outcomes-based education, as we've talked about, answers that time-old question, what skills, attitudes, and knowledge should be taught? And it's sort of an orientation where it is ready, aim, fire. Um, it makes more sense than what we normally do. A lot of times you get ready with a program, you fire, and then you decide what your aim's going to be. Um, so the aim should come before the fire. That is, let's say this is what we're going to teach, and then you start to teach it and see if kids can reach that. Well, the mission statement defines that. And then to be specific about it, the school system writes the exit outcomes. They clearly define the mission statement into a curriculum that all kids will know, or what all kids will believe, or what they're going to be able to do when they graduate. Now, this is the exit outcome parts. And it reflects an orientation that these are the things that you're going to need to be successful in an ever-changing world. So exit outcomes might look like this. Here's a sample one that I kind of thought as I fashioned my Runyan public school. Our students, to prepare all students to live, function, and contribute to an ever-changing society, the Runyan School District will demonstrate these things. One, an ability to communicate through reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So you have the three major reading, writing, and speaking, but you also, I put in listening because I think that's an important human trait. And then second, it's not only being able to communicate hourly, it's also you've got to have some interpersonal skills. So skills in interpersonal and group interaction, as well as communication through nonverbal channels. So in the first two, we have a focus on the verbal channels and then the nonverbal channels. And then you start looking at some of these other items. Third, to have some qualities and values that are needed to be successful in a family, community, and a nation. So there's a little bit of citizenship, teaching them to be a family, and then to work in your local community. Fourth, you need to have basic physical and mental health habits, skills in taking care of yourself, both physically and mentally. Next is the capacities to be creative, to be critical, to be analytical in how you approach things and look at information and different problems. And then next, you have a respect for your civic responsibility and your environment. Next, skills in using technology as a tool for learning to learn how to use and change with technology to better keep you to become uh, a lifelong learner. And then last, the multiculturalism aspect of being aware of various peoples and the cultures of the world. To me, that would define a child that I would like to graduate from my school, be what I would want my children to be like, and so why can't all kids be like that? So that's my mission statement, my exit outcomes. So once you got the mission statement done and your exit outcomes, staff then writes a scope and sequence of curriculum. It's a framework of your programs, of your courses, that your exit outcomes defined. And for example, in the first exit outcome, I wanted to have reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So for all four of those areas, I would have a scope and sequence of curriculum from kindergarten to graduation that would increase their knowledge, skills, and beliefs about that exit outcome. So I would directly have staff, if that's what we believe, teach those specific exit outcomes and specific scope and sequence of curriculum to reach that one. And we'd have that for all 8 of the exit outcomes that I listed for you previously. For an example, basically it's a design down, deliver up. That is, you design it down and then you deliver it up. You design it from the mission statement all the way down to the lesson outcomes, but you deliver it up. Then when you teach, you start with the lesson outcomes, but they are directly involved with the unit outcomes, the course outcomes, the exit outcomes, and ultimately everything you're teaching usually comes back to the mission statement. Does that make sense? Design down from where you want to end up. You start with your major concept in the mission statement. You define it more specifically in the exit outcomes. Then all your courses that you teach, well, write their outcomes from their exit outcomes. And then each unit that each teacher teaches in their classroom will come from their course outcomes. And then from each unit, each lesson they teach will come from their unit outcome. A pure design. Design down, deliver up. And that's a scope and sequence of curriculum. The next thing that's usually involved in an outcomes-based education is there's instructional variation. You've decided what you want to teach in the mission statement. You've been specific about the mission with the exit outcomes, and then you defined it in a scope and sequence of objectives and outcomes. And so now you have instructional variation and reteaching for each of those outcomes. It's a system of instructional design that makes delivery to learning styles and reteaching. There's a rich diversity of teaching techniques that teachers are trained in teaching to the different learning styles and different multiple intelligences. They all believe in mastery learning, which we'll talk about in a minute, and they make time to make sure that you just don't go on if not all your kids have learned the material. There's time is an important part, and maybe you can't teach the whole book, but what you teach, you've taught it well. For example, in the area of learning styles, your orientations are much different between schools. Some use different models, like true colors with orange, blue, green, gold type of teachers and gold learners. You have Dunn's learning styles instruments, which look at a whole host of factors in the environment, emotional and social and psychological uh, uh, characteristics of each child and each teacher. Uh, you just and some even taught the left brain, right brain, which the hemisphere of the brain, global analytic, just all kinds of ways to look at learning styles that teachers are exposed to in the OBE type of movement, because learning is a matter of style. There's also that orientation that intelligence is not just defined by, as we used to, just um, by what you know, but it's how you can solve problems. And there are ways to look at different types of intelligences. Um, and that the idea of an OBE type of movement is to develop a child that can operate out of all the intelligences. And some kids are more gifted or oriented toward being logical, mathematical, that can think rationally. Some are very oriented to being verbal, that they are sensitive to words and language, or verbal linguistic, or the visual spatial. They have the capacity to see visual spatial, and they're good at geometry types of curriculums. Some are very interpersonal. They're the ones that usually get sent to the office for talking all the time, but they learn by interacting with others. And then there are others that are intrapersonal, that they're not so much introverted, but they look within themselves about their feelings, strengths, weaknesses, and that's what guides their behavior. Others are body kinesthetic. They learn by doing. And there are others that are music rhythmic. If I went to a music conservatory school, I would be considered learning disabled, because I can't carry a tune. I can't play an instrument. I wish I could. I don't even sound good in the shower. So, in that intelligence, I need to develop. But OBE is sensitive to the way kids learn, and they try to teach that. Um, Next is there is an assessment system, but it's not norm based, where you compare it to other kids, because that doesn't tell you much. But a criteria based reference test will connect what you test with the curriculum. That is, you test what you teach, and you teach what you test, in essence. There's a tight alignment with your exit program and course outcomes, and they in this assessment system, they can document what kids can do successfully. It could be a portfolio system. That's what higher ed does anymore with teachers. They develop a portfolio. What can they do? And showing what they've done in the past. And then in the public school system, if you did that for each of your children and showed it to your parents at the end of the year, this is what you gave me at the beginning, and here's what they're able to do here at the end of the course, I think that each of the parents would be highly impressed, more so than just an A, B, C, or a score on a test. But the assessment system enables kids to demonstrate their mastering. And it's a scope and sequence again before they graduate. Um, it If you're criteria based, it avoids comparisons among students, because none of the test scores will be related to what other kids do, and kids move at their own rate, and sometimes they make great gains real quickly, and then they slow down. It's never a constant upward spiral. It's a kind of a hilly graph as kids learn throughout their scope and sequence of from kindergarten to 12th grade. But it's criteria based assessments that are used for our kids in the OBE school. Um, I love this one. Your grading curve and my learning curve don't intersect. That was me in elementary school. Student advancement is the next item. It's based on performance. And this is a hard one to swallow for many people. It's a system of instructional organization delivery where students' advancement is based on performance, not on age, but on what kids are able to do. And they advance through the curriculum when they demonstrate that they can do what the scope and sequence outcomes said they should be able to do. And if you on a pretest are able to show that you don't need to spend your time learning this, you move on. So mastery learning has a time system that's almost individualized for every kid as they move through the system of learning. And in a lot of times in a public school to start to initiate that, instead of doing one kid at a time, you have what William Spady would propose. You teach, and then after you've taught, it could be you teach a unit for an entire week. Then you give a test on it, and those that receive 80%, they go and above, they go to enrichment. They don't need to spend their time relearning material. They go to something that's a little bit more fun, a little bit more exciting, but still within the realm. They expand upon what was taught. Those that score below 80% go to a reteaching episode, which is different from what was done before. You're not in the same learning style, you're not in the same intelligence. You try to reteach it in a different way, and then you retest it for those kids that didn't learn it or reach the 80% test that time, and then you come back and join together the two groups after reteaching, retesting, and the enrichment group, and then you go on and teach another unit. Now, you can't just continue to go on until every kid reaches mastery, but at least you gave them a chance to learn that material. And sometimes then in a multi-tier system, you have other systems in the elementary school, especially in Kansas, that will continue to reteach material that wasn't learned. But that's Spady's loop of mastery learning. Works well. And then the last three components of OBE, as you find, is very closely aligned with the effective schools movement, that you have a climate that allows all the students and staff to perform with high expectations. You have a system of improvement where staff collaborates, they find themselves accountable for what the kids are doing, and the leadership gives them those tools that they need to improve, to renew things. There's also a system of data collection where you're regularly updating your system with the things that you need to do to improve both in your teaching and student performance, so that you reach a higher level of success. So these items are typically the outcomes-based educational movement definition. So again, OBE is simply an orientation that schools use to define themselves by focusing on what three things: skills, attitudes, and knowledge they want their kids to leave the school with. Makes sense, and it works. Hope you enjoyed it.